All right, we want to look also what is happening in Tanzania right now as well. 3 democracy bills set for parliament. That is a story that you want to follow inside on page 2. And also yesterday, the splash was on the state of democracy in Tanzania. In light of what we've seen recently, the political space being a bit more resilient of the opposition. And of course, then again, we saw the turning side of it over the weekend with the arrest of Lissu so far, but we just want to get an inkling of what is happening there with the politics of Tanzania and the state of democracy as it is demonstrated here. The 3 bills, what are they? And this is where I want just to pick up right now the brains of Professor Sungi to just tell us what is happening in Tanzania with the 3 bills. First of all, what are these 3 bills on the state of democracy?
So thank you. Of course, I'm a citizen of the United Republic of Tanzania. The only problem is that I've left for some time and I'm probably not very intimately connected, which is a shame with what is happening in Tanzania. But I can make some general comments about what is happening. It's a fact that President Suluhu Hassan has opened up the democratic space in a way in which today political parties can hold meetings. So it's an incremental change. But I think what is ailing Tanzania is its constitution. The unitary presidency in Tanzania creates a space where a president becomes so powerful, and Kenya lived this for some time. And I recall Mwalimu Nyerere was asked, I think it was in 1960s, 70s, by a British BBC journalist whether he was a dictator, and I remember Mwalimu Nyerere saying, "The Constitution makes me a dictator." So I think for me, as a human rights lawyer, the only prescription for Tanzania's democracy is adoption of a new constitution. And until that happens, we are going to continue seeing what we are seeing today.
So we had also the arrest of Lissu over the weekend and the release of him.
Yeah.
Before we saw the President Suluhu extending or proffering that particular hand. And we thought we are breaking away from that draconian sort of rule when it comes to the political opposition, political space that Magufuli had actually, postured.
Yeah, so I think President Suluhu Hassan has to be, congratulated in some way, because as I said, she's opened up the democratic space, progressively. It's a progressive opening up. But of course, things are not the way they are supposed to be. And right now, there are issues relating to the purported sale of the port in Dar es Salaam. There is also the issue of the licensing of the hunting licensing in the game reserves. And I think the country, there's this perception that the country is about to be sold to, Arabs. And so there are a lot of interesting issues that are happening in the country. And we still see when people are attempting to raise their voices and questioning some of these initiatives, the government coming hard on them, which, as I said, it's because of the constitutional dispensation that Tanzania has, which allows the president to be that powerful with less ability to be questioned by other branches of government.
So what does this bills on democracy really portend, or what is actually encapsulated there? What is it meant to cure?
But I said, as I said initially, I haven't read those bills, so I don't really know what they are talking about. But I think the attempt here is to make sure that Tanzania's democracy grows. The democratic space allows citizens to raise their voices and question government initiatives, which I think is a problem right now. So I cannot opine on the three bills that are on the desk, on the table of Parliament, but I think that's the attempt. But until Tanzanians have a new constitution, because we are still using the 1977 constitution, which really was a result of a one-party system. A few amendments were done in 1984 to include the Bill of Rights, which has a lot of clawbacks. And so there's a lot of things that need to be done as far as really opening this democratic space in Tanzania.
Right. Do you think it needs a constitutional moment? We always talk about constitutional moment, even here in the country, since the promulgation of a constitution. Since now, independence until now, do you think? Well, I think we are living in a different epoch of time right now, and the constitution is not really like that of the myths and the passions that cannot be changed. You go with the seasons and the changes and the times so that you are able to adapt as well. From your own assessment, you as an academician, you think Tanzania is ripe for a new constitutional moment?
It is, and we were very hopeful. This was during President Kikwete's final term as president. There was a constituent assembly that was created. There was a draft constitution that was prepared by Judge Sinde Warioba. Opinions were gathered throughout the country, and that, in my view, was the constitutional moment. But I don't understand what really happened. That constitutional draft, the constitution draft, was shelved, and you know, and again, these members of parliament who became the Constituent Assembly were actually remunerated. They were paid, and that thing was just shelved. And now the president is attempting to revive that process. I just read in the newspaper the other day, they say they need 3 years of civic education to enable that process to start afresh. Why would you need 3 years for civic education on how to promulgate a new constitution? So we see there's a lot of sideshows.
Well, it depends also. Maybe it's a huge chunk of population that we're talking about. Tanzanians almost 100 million right now?
Well, 60
million, yeah.
No, I don't think that's really the case.
60 million. I always thought it's much higher than that.
No, we are Kenya and Tanzania have very few the difference in population. But for me, these are just sideshows, and the political elite in Tanzania do not want to allow, because the draft constitution limited the powers of the president, and brought about this aspect of checks and balances between the organs of the state. And I know they're not interested, because this will mean their power is going to be less and less, and the Mwananchi's voice is going to be heard more louder and clearer.
Right. But how would I be free as maybe a politician who wants to lean on the opposition side, looking at what was meted out on Tundu Lissu, his body riddled with gun bullets. He was actually here in Nairobi hospital recuperating, had also to seek intervention overseas. He's been now on exile in Belgium. He is a key political figure in Tanzanian politics. But if we may juxtapose his face and figure with the current regime, with the previous regime of Jakaya Kikwete, we can look also at Benjamin Mkapa and the rest. How then do we talk about democracy in all these figures of Tanzanian leadership?
Well, I think Tundu Lissu, I know the man very well. We are kind of related. Well, he has started these initiatives way back during President Benjamin Mkapa's tenure. He's a lawyer by profession. He's an activist, and I think he has a genuine interest to make sure that the democratic space in Tanzania grows. I may not be, inclined to support his tactics on how to do it, especially the language that he sometimes uses in trying to put across a point. But I think he has played a huge role, and as you said, his life was almost ended because of this. The government has not shown interest to investigate who really attempted to kill him, which is very unfortunate. So I think his activism is important, and that space was really empty. It was open, and I think he has been able to be the face of of the opposition in Tanzania with others, because there's another gentleman, his name is Dr. Slaa. Slaa was a chairman of Chadema, Chama cha Demokrasia and Maendeleo, at some point, and then he defected back he became a CCM party member, and he was appointed to be an ambassador. He retired, came back home, he continued his activism, and he was also detained because he was questioning about the purported sale of the Dar es Salaam port. So what can we say? I think Tanzania needs to learn a lot from Kenya. We are neighbors. And I think when Tanzanians are able to get a constitution that allows the voice of Wananchi to be heard, that will be the revolution that Tanzania needs.
Right, maybe we can hark back also to your tenure as a deputy chair of African Union, Ambassador Erastus Moncha, and through your reflection on that particular seat and looking at Tanzania then and now, how would you say Tanzania is faring?
Well, first of all, I respect my brother's opinion, because being Tanzanian and being a constitutional lawyer or a human rights lawyer, he has perhaps more hands-on than I have about Tanzania. My image and understanding of Tanzania has been very much crafted through the digital space, what I've seen through the digital space, but the little that I've also interacted. I do go to Tanzania once in a while, for business. But just on a slight different note, I think President Suluhu has come out as a person that is totally different from her predecessor, President Magufuli, who was very much very forceful and with hands-on, but I would say didn't even allow judicial process in some cases. He would be sacked summarily and not even given proper hearing and the rest. She's come in with a mastery kind of approach, and she's a person that seems to be pro-integration in the region, and a charming person who has kind of, as the professor has indicated, opened democratic space. Obviously, I mean, Tanzania, you asked the question about then and now. Tanzania actually led the way for East Africa in terms of succession. Yes. Remember President Nyerere, he served, and when he realized that his ideas were running out of steam, he bowed out and allowed Mwinyi to come in. And the story continued. Mwinyi allowed Mkapa to come in. Mkapa allowed Kikwete to come in. I worked very closely with President Kikwete. We still remain close. And from what I've seen, you would admire the way Tanzania has handled, particularly succession issue, which has been tricky in Africa. 2 terms and very predictable elections being held every 5 years. So Tanzania has a lot to be proud of. And if you look at some of the achievements, particularly if you look at the economy and look at trade in East Africa, Tanzania was a net importer from Kenya. Tanzania now is net exporter to Kenya. Yeah. And those are things that we can give credit for. And she's also gone out to open the space. Obviously, and I want to agree, the Constitution is a living document. And if it is 1977, done under, she said, one-party rule, I think there is a case for fundamental overhaul of that Constitution, if not a new Constitution. And I think this is where we should go. I'm not sure about this question of, I've heard all these stories around Africa saying, oh, the port of Mombasa has been sold, the port of Dar es Salaam. I think it's better to check the authenticity. Perhaps being given management, because as I work in trade logistics in some areas, as you know, I work with Trademark East Africa. The port of Dar es Salaam is assuming a lot of importance to serve Burundi, to serve DRC and the rest. Yes. And I think the president might be genuinely interested to see how can we improve its effectiveness. Because compared, say, with Mombasa, its cost is lower. And so in that quest to improve, if he gets, because for instance, if you go to port of Djibouti, it's managed by TP World. And so perhaps let's check on whether that is the true story, that he's selling the port or he's giving a management contract, which to me is a very normal thing to do if to improve productivity.
But it shouldn't be a story of debate on whether it's been sold or it's under new management or whether it's being leased as well.
Exactly.
They need to come out clearly, because I think this has been the subject, and it will be a very, very key catnip issue when it comes to the re-election of Suluhu as well. I think the opponents are going to say, you know, can we get clear on the port of this port, Tanzania ports, which they say is under new management. So what is the new management? Is it the leasing or the selling of a port? I don't know, Noah Midamba, what has been also your assessment so far?
Allow me, to take a glimpse at the beginning of the so-called democratic movement before we get to the gist of that question. I concur with my two colleagues in terms of what they have expressed. But remember, Sir Winston Churchill said democracy is the worst form of government, or else there is nothing else that can replace it. At the beginning in the 60s, you all remember the airlift where Tom Mboya led in terms of taking students to the United States. There were 800 students, by the way, at that time. There were not only Kenyans, there were Tanzanians, there were Ugandans, there were Nyasaland at that time, you know, that were all mixed. And the idea was that the British were not willing to train our people to take over at the time of independence. And that is the biggest problem with the Francophone countries, because they did just that. And so our 800 people, most of them returned to Africa and took major responsibility. In fact, later on, Tom Mboya connected with Nyerere, Jamal Abdel Nasser, Nkrumah, all that. But we had two choices at that point. We could have gone the communist way, where the governments run from a centrality standpoint, and the common man has very little say on it. Or we could go the democratic way. And throughout Africa, to where we stand, everybody is claiming to be democratic, except reality is a different thing altogether. And so the Constitution, or whatever form we create, has to have people that have certain level of education and understanding and the mindset. The Constitution itself is not going to change anything, overnight. Like our friend, the constitutional lawyer, others will say. So the issue, when you look at Tanzania, from the beginning to now, we have not had a coup in Tanzania, military coup, or a change of government. So we must give credit to Julius Nyerere, what he promoted, the thrust of Tanzanians coming together under one united nation without ethnic bickering and all that. So that is an aspect of Tanzania that continues till now. Now, so we are in a modern, highly competitive area where you need really democracy. You need a debate about the value of the country and the direction the country is doing. But you can't do it when you just rally people and say, yes, we are going east. There has to be a democratic process, a true development forward. And when you look at like my friend said, yes, it is time that correction be made within the country to allow alternative voices.
Right, thank you.
In Tanzania.
Dibal, can I just part in on a small anecdote to what my dear brother Noah said? He called it that at independence we had two choices. Turning east, he called it communism or socialism, but turning west was equal democracy. I'm not sure that's what you want to call it. I would call it capitalism. It was a choice of capitalism and socialism. And I would not even call it democracy, because for me, I admire Western form of governance because of the fact that as an individual you have liberties that really stand out very clear. But I will not call those countries democracy. Because look at colonialism, look at the kind of things they did. And for me, having struggled, particularly living in Zambia, seeing South Africa and the rest fighting to get rid of those regimes from the West, I would not call that as a democracy. I think democracy has to be defined differently.
Yes.
And on this, I would beg to give a different anecdote. But if I remember being a student in the 60s and the countries of Africa, don't forget that East supported the liberation struggle and taking therefore a choice where to align one. And during that Cold War, it was so tempting to go East. I mean, history has taught us, and that's why Nyerere was smart enough when he realized that perhaps an African by content doesn't perform very well under socialism or capitalism or whatever it is. He gave in nicely, and he gave to Mwinyi, and since then Tanzania is like the rest of them.
He did. And if you may have that editorial cartoon just in full, what Gado had captured earlier, regarding this particular deal on the port is questions which are being raised. The director may just pick it up in full that we may make some, is it making noise, like Halibongo was really saying. Director, can we just pick it up in full? We can see there Suluhu, the changing faces of Suluhu. All those, then on the other side you see it's Magufuli. All those who oppose this deal, right? We will deal with them. Bang, and he's really banging the chair. And lastly, you can see that is the banging of Dr. Magufuli. So, uncoupling Magufuli from Suluhu on this particular deal, if the deal is sweet, why is it being shoved down the Tanzanian's throat? If there are questions around it, and people are, is it sold or is it leased? It's very key, because also here in the country, I think now we are mulling over the leasing of these ports of ours in Mombasa as a president. Now the bids are out. It's a question around the ports and privatization of it. There's so much politics around it. Professor Sungi, as I've said, this will be some of the tripping wires when it comes to re-election.
Now, I think as my elder brothers here have opined, Tanzania is a very interesting country.
Let me ask before you even move on. Now that we had Suluhu coming in, taking over from Magufuli, from being the vice president to the president, do we count that as one term? Well, albeit very short, or do you have a constitutional limit when it comes to of course, the presidency as well?
Okay, yes, the constitution has a two-term limit.
Two-term limit.
Yes, so the president, President Suluhu Hassan, has the constitutional right to run for president. And I mean, I don't want to be a predictor here, a political predictor, but I think she stands a huge chance to be elected for her second term. Now, the interesting part is that when she came in after this horrible accident, after we lost our president, there was an attempt by some political commentators in Tanzania to think that she would be very different from Magufuli, okay? So I remember she came out and said, you know, something to the fact that I will still continue what was left by the president. And there's a Swahili slogan that they always do, is it goes like Jamhuri ya Tanzania, kazi iendelee. Yeah, so it presupposes that she will continue the policies that were left by the late president since she was part of that administration. But I think as we have opined here, we've started seeing some, baby steps where the current administration is attempting to move away from the policies of the last administration. You know, like opening up the democratic space, as we said. And I agree that these are things that don't happen overnight. It needs time. But again, the history of Tanzania is a bit different from Kenya, as we all know. But again, my point remains that until Tanzania has a constitution that allows the voice of a common Tanzania to be heard, we are going to continue seeing these types of, you know, oppressive attempts to undermine the voice of a common Mwananchi.
So has there been any amendments to that constitution to accommodate the opposition? Since it was a unitary state, of course, should we say party? Has there been any amendment to make sure that opposition's voice also is accommodated? You can tell us, hack back into history and give us how that was accommodated.
Yes. So as I said, the major amendments that were done was in 1984.
1984.
Which brought in the Bill of Rights to the Constitution. Before that, there was no Bill of Rights. The only problem is the framing of these rights that are, you know, behest with clawback clauses. A right is given on one hand and it's taken away on the other. And this is clearly a problem. And the current constitution is made to be subjective to other laws. So constitutionally, that's really a big problem, because the constitution is supposed to be the supreme law of the land. So those are the, I think, fundamental problems that, in my view, you know, do not support the opening up of this democratic space if I compare it with Kenya.
All right. I want us now to just maybe juxtapose what is happening also, especially in Uganda right now, looking at what we had on the Daily Monitor, where we have right now that U.S. companies, just to, not really the headline, but just the U.S. companies stopping Uganda import over anti-gay law. And we saw also there was a determination from the courts, that is the Supreme Court. This is where we are at. Just wanted to highlight this here, over here. U.S. companies stop Uganda imports over anti-gay law. And this is a blowback right now that Uganda has to face in regard to their decision to stick with the anti-gay law. And we've seen the Bretton Woods institutions as well now is freezing some of the accounts of Uganda in terms of doling out funds to Uganda. And we've heard Yoweri Museveni saying, yeah, we're going to have it rough, but we're going to sustain and remain with our decision as well. Especially in light of what we've seen here in the country yesterday with the Supreme Court decision on the Queer Communities Association, the freedom of association as well. And we're talking about democracy in the West and the capitalism. Why are they moralizing? Or are they acting as a moralist when it comes to funding? So what is moralization got to do with extension of debt facilities? Well, and you're the human rights lawyer here as well, Dr. Sung, you'll chime in very largely on it. But could we, Ambassador, just talk about it, especially because we can see this encroachment, and especially if this went on full steam ahead with the current, what we had here in the country as well, and the decision from the Supreme Court, that will affect the process of this particular bill that is in their house. I don't know if Kaluma will also be pulling out the bill in light of this particular judgment.
The bill, that's a loaded question, not in terms of being heavy, but you brought in quite a bit of elements, the Kenyan aspect, the constitution, but also Uganda, and the sanctions that are being imposed. Here, I must come out very clear to say, I fully stand with President Museveni on this position of gay. And this is on my account that as a Christian, I believe that a family unity must be protected in strict conformity with the Bible. And here I have no apologies. The second one is when I look at the double standards being applied by the Western governments, and in particular the US, I totally really take a different position, and this is where I align myself with President Museveni. You cannot moralize, force this on the population. And you can also not have double standards. I mean, you go to Saudi Arabia, they do the same thing. They don't allow this. You go to all those countries in the Middle East, which are very clear on gay issues and the rest. They are not being sanctioned, but Africa is, because we are weak and all that. And I think this is where I think the US needs to rethink. In any case, this is the difference, the problem I have, and a constitutional lawyer will help me here. The people of Uganda, through the people's representatives, parliament, goes and passes a law. If there is a problem with the law, that law is already before Supreme Court being challenged, or it is regarded. Now, why don't you allow the legal process of Uganda to go through? The people have, this is, the parliament represents the people. The people of Uganda feel that our morals should align in X manner. You cannot then come and say, you are wrong, you are right, this is a moral issue. And you don't legislate moral issues anyway. So I think if people want to be gay, want to do whatever, I would say, do whatever you do, but don't force us to come and believe what you believe, or come and tell us that we must align with you. Your belief is your belief. What you want to do in your dark corner, do it. But don't force us that we must come and identify with you, or go your way, or legislate to allow you to do it in the open, or whatever you want to do. I feel, and that's where I would take a very different position from what our Supreme Court has done. I think, to me, we are destroying our society. We are adopting Western form of governance and values, which will destroy our fabric of a nation. And when you destroy a family, you destroy a nation. And you see it in the coming years.
Well, you know, the narrative that is also being streamlined is of the progressives. So they'll tell you you're not really a progressive. You're not really going with the stream of time. These are changing times. We need to be more open, as it were. But let me just give
But the God I worship doesn't change when it comes to fundamental issues of how you are created, how you worship, and the value of a family. The God I worship doesn't change on that.
Well, they'll come on and break away and say, we need to be accommodative. They're not, everyone is not really appreciative that we have a God. We have the atheist community as well. And this is the current...
Accommodate in what sense? I don't force you to do what you want to do. But don't force me to accept what you want to do.
Okay. Yeah, this is where I think it's a very controversial issue, but we need to discuss it, because now it's actually here with us. We cannot just be burying our heads in the sand, because this is a war of minds, a war of ideology. It's what they call it. You call it the sharp what? We have the sharp. I forget what you normally call it. There was the hardware, and then we have the sharp. No, madam, help me. You always say this sharp. The narratives that we are continuing from the hardware, where people use the hardware policies, and now we have the sharp policies that are really coming, or the sharp power. That is what the sharp power.
We get you. I know where
I'm talking about the sharp power.
I have been in positions in the United States where to rule over these kind of issues or deal with it almost on a daily occurrence. And the ball is not a fun thing to deal with. So I concur with what my colleague Mwensa is saying. I, on one hand, am hesitant to go to the extent of legislative a deal that Uganda came with. I think we can handle this in a different way as a sovereign national state.
You don't agree with the legislation?
I'm not sure we need to have the legislation. I think we need to say our priority number one is here, our priority number two is here, And then we support civil rights. We have a culture on which we have a definition of what that culture is about. And we are going to govern by ourselves. We are going to be distinct if that comes. And so the issue of this morality is a very complex issue. And as you can realize, there are two countries that have moral police. I think now there are three. There is Iran, there is Afghanistan, there's Saudi Arabia. Debal, one time we went to tour Iran with the students from the United States. And you know, there is restriction. So women have to wear certain things and they cannot go a certain way. And so we went to the beach and one woman crossed over to the area where she was not supposed to go. She's wearing bikini. The next thing we know, she's wrapped up in a blanket. She's being taken to jail for violating the rule. Yes, she did violate the rule. But this is not Iranian. This is a Mexican student in the United States. Now, so what we need to do, and again, this is the problem.
Mexican student in the United States?
Yeah, from United States.
Oh, from United States. Okay.
From United States with us, but a Mexican student. And they said, no, she's Iranian. She's violating our rule. So she's being taken to court, to jail. And then we had to intervene, and then within one day we packed our things and left the country. So the question, we don't need that in Africa. We don't need moral police to tell women and how to dress up and everything. But what we need is to protect our interest, our society, from being legislated for. The US have their own system. They have certain level of development where they've reached, where they can talk about this thing and people can express them openly. But if you look at the situation where an old man is standing at the corner kissing the other old man, it's not a fun thing to look at. If you look at a situation where little kids are kissing each other, little girls, and all that, it's not fun. And therefore, we have the moral duty and responsibility to guide this country the way we have. But without tight, clear legislation like the one that Uganda just did. Kenya is the same thing. We can do it through religious way. Mwencha and I belong to a certain sect. My friend here belonged to a certain sect. And they express and live within that relationship, but it's quiet. It's not on public. It's not in our front and everything. And this is what we're telling America. This is where America has gone wrong in terms of policy.
Right. Of course, if you're watching us, of course, we're discussing the issue in Uganda right now, and this is in light of the anti-gay bill, all the act as it is right now that was installed, and what is happening with the blowbacks as far as sanctions are concerned, the freezing of funds to Uganda, and companies also trading with Uganda, which are stopping imports due to anti-gay law. Just yesterday as well, here in the country, we had the Supreme Court, of course, staying with the judgment that it had made earlier regarding the association of the queer community, that is LGBTQ, and they have a freedom and rights of association, and on technicality that member of parliament who had actually filed this petition, that he had no right to actually make that particular petition according to the Supreme Court. But what does it really portend even moving forward as well with the we-they siege mentality that we can see happening globally, them playing the victim, and now it's not about association, it's now mainstreaming this gay and the gender fluidity that now is overtaking the world, and people are talking about gender identity. Right now, we're not sure if you're a man or a woman. Even when you get, if you get a child in the hospital, Now there's another box that you have to tick of options.
Neither.
Whether neither, you're neither. So it will be your decision. I mean, this is where the world is. But what we're talking about is, even as we are on that particular frontier, because these are different worldviews now that we are fighting, and it's a war of minds and ideology. And there we have a human rights lawyer, because now they will peg and say this is a freedom of association. But to what extent is a freedom of association where it is breaking from the norms of the anatomy of a human being, right? Where we know that the way you are, and this, I know philosophies will really fall in, and we talk about creationism, and we say, yes, we don't believe in creationism, we believe in Darwinism. I mean, there's so many things will come into play. We're atheists, we just believe in making our own decision. There is no supreme power, and these are the challenges that we're facing. Now, if I'm not sure that my son or my daughter in the next years will be a boy or a girl, how then do we protect our future generation from these ideologies that we're fighting with, that is being bombarded everywhere with the sitcoms and the movies, and there's such a mass culture that is invading our spaces. But they will always peg this on our rights.
Yeah.
You are the human rights lawyer.
I don't know. I think this is this debate relating to the legalization of sexual minorities, that is gay, lesbian, and transgendered, is a heated one. I mean, we all know that. But I think it will be overstretching what the Supreme Court of Kenya has done, because I would be very concerned if the Supreme Court of Kenya in its decision would have pegged their decision on morality. But what the Supreme Court did, their lordships, what they did was, because that's their mandate, is to read the Constitution and provide the interpretation of the Constitution of Kenya. The right to freedom of association is a right, is a constitutional right. And if I can quote what the judges said in this, it's very simple. They say that it would be unconstitutional to limit the right to associate through denial of registration of an association purely on the basis of sexual orientation of the applicant. Okay. So if they would have based their decision on the sexual orientation of the applicants, that would be clearly problematic. But their lordships didn't do that. And I don't think that by affirming the constitutional rights of the applicants, it means that the Supreme Court of Kenya is attempting to moralize or legalize homosexuality. I don't think that's the case. Now, I'm also a Christian, and then I know my Christian values and what they tell me, but I think we have to be able to clearly make this distinction about the morality of this issue and the rights, the constitutional rights of individuals.
Well, I'm always reminded.
The bar, I cannot argue because I'm not a lawyer, but when I look at that judgment, there are two things that worry me. Here is a moment when the court could have talked about the issue of how we handle this subject, but dismissed it on a technicality. That, okay, the person before the court was not party in the previous case. I'm not a lawyer, but that's to me a technicality.
That's correct.
It's a technicality. Yes. And you're not addressing the substance. The substance here is that if today, Dibal, you and I say we declared we are known as thieves, and we go to register our constitution, we have a right to say we are robbers, we break into homes and do all sorts of bad things, but we have a right to association. We will have an association. I mean, this is a window that you are using to say, okay, you have the constitution says, but the constitution must also say, like we say, which organizations do you register? Do you register an organization because they have a right of association? That is to me the issue. And as I said, I don't legislate morality. morality shouldn't be registered. That's where I agree with him when he says even the the parliament in Uganda shouldn't register the morality. But if the people believe that they don't want to talk about gayism as an issue that should be forced down on them, leave society to evolve. As we evolve, we will get probably there. You never know, because we are headed towards Sodom and Gomorrah. But that shouldn't be forced on us.
All right, you should be winding up on it. If Madam, you have something you wanted to
Well, just what I want to say is let each society set there and define how they want to interpret their society, what direction they want to go to. It is very, very important that we look at Tanzania, we look at Kenya as a sovereign state that has the right to define where they want to go. If that's what Uganda want to do, that's fine.
Yes. No, I think Professor is correct. Each society must dictate what are their norms and values, and no other society can come in and attempt to redirect that other societies how they should live their lives. But again, if you read the title of the monitor, is it the monitor, Ugandan monitor? It says U.S. companies. I would be concerned if it was the U.S. government. These are U.S. companies, so these are private entities that are saying we are not doing business with Uganda because of this legislation. So private companies can do whatever they want, but if it was the federal government, that could have been a different
aren't
question.
they towing the line of how also the president of US has actually reacted on this particular legislation?
Yes,
that
right.
They've roundly condemned it. So that will make sure that sometimes also you told the line, you are the companies which are trading with Uganda.
Right.
So you have to speak also the voice of the president, as it were.
Yeah.
Even as you mentioned now with the Bretton Woods institutions, now you're freezing facilities that it has been extended to Uganda. I think that is a big blow also to Uganda, but they were prepared for it. This is what we can say, that we're living in changing times. And I will always say that always be reminded of that Abunwasi's story of the nail, that he had sold a house to a gentleman, and of course he had a big mansion, and he made sure that he remained with one nail that was actually nailed on the door of one of the rooms in the house. And he told the gentleman, you know, we're selling this house to you. I'm giving you every right, of course, to this house because now you've sold it to me, but there's one nail in that house that I don't want to sell it to you. Just leave it for me. And the gentleman said, oh, what is with a nail? It's only just but a nail. And so years passed on, and Abunwasi wanted to reclaim back his house. And he went and rapped on this gentleman's door one day. He opened the door and he found Abunwasi there. He said, hey, how are you? Do you remember my nail? Yes. And Abunwasi had a package. He said, now I want to put this package on that particular nail. Because Abunwasi had attempted to get back his house, but the gentleman said, hey, this was a done deal. I can't sell out the house anymore or sell it back to you anymore. So he went and put the nail, put this package on the nail. And months after months, there was this reeking smell that was coming from that particular package, which inside was the intestines of a goat and sheep and a pig all tucked in, and the smell was unbearable. And this gentleman had to vacate and give back the house to Abunwasi and sold it back because of a nail. And this is a nail. Sometimes we'll just buy into these policies as well, and they always come and remind us, do you remember my nail? And this is a stinking, of course, storm that is coming your way, especially when you're coming to fighting ideologies. Let us remember that nail, even as a country, that might really affect the future generation. We take a short break. When we circle back, we continue with more. We shall look at what is happening with AU joining now the G20. You're watching Global Today.